The 85-year-old man barely grazed the parked motorcycle. His hands shook, his steps slow, but his apology came instantly. "I'm sorry, son. Didn't mean any trouble." But the biker didn't care. He hit him hard, knocking Walter Dean Morris, a retired Marine, to the pavement. Groceries spilled, blood streamed down his face. His veteran's cap lay nearby. No one stepped in. They saw the jacket and still turned away. Walter sat alone on the bench, clutching the last piece of his pride. But just half an hour later, engines rumbled in the distance. A military convoy approached. Leading it was a uniformed officer, his son. They didn't come for payback. They came to show the world what honor still means. Walter Dean Morris, 85, hadn't always been the fragile old man who moved carefully through store aisles gripping grocery bags like they were gear from a battlefield. Once he was the battlefield, the wall that stood between danger and innocence. A United States Marine for 32 years, Walter served in 3 wars: Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Each left a lasting impact not just on his body but deep within his spirit. He joined in 1969 at just 18, with a fresh buzz cut and boots too big for his feet. A year later, he was knee-deep in the Mekong Delta, pulling comrades out of gunfire-ridden waters. Vietnam taught him mortality. Iraq confronted him with madness. Afghanistan taught him to endure. Through every deployment, Walter never chased glory. He chased purpose. That pursuit cost him friendships, time, and parts of himself he'd never recover. He retired a master gunnery sergeant, a rank few attain. But if you asked about his time in service, he rarely spoke of medals. What he did recall, with quiet pauses, were the ones who never made it home. He'd gesture to the jacket he wore, frayed at the sleeves and bleached by the sun. "This belonged to Mike," he'd say gently. Mike was a young Marine who fought with him during Fallujah's siege. He took shrapnel meant for Walter and died holding their position. The jacket returned with Mike's effects, and Walter had worn it every winter since, not for heat, but for remembrance, for respect. Walter's present life was much simpler, a modest unit just off Main Street. Morning coffee, arthritis pills, and a folded grocery list scrawled in large, uneven letters. He still saluted the flag every morning, even if no one noticed. Still polished old boots out of instinct, though he hadn't worn them in years. What hurt most wasn't aging or pain. It was how the world stopped seeing him. The same man who once commanded units was now brushed past by hurried shoppers. The same hands that once held an M16 steady now fumbled with cartons of milk. He never grumbled. Marines don't do that. But every time someone called him sir without meeting his gaze, or worse, ignored him completely, something inside dimmed. Still, Walter Morris carried on, because that's what Marines do. It started like any other Tuesday. Walter Morris rose before daylight, as always. His knees popped when he stood, the chill stiffened his joints, but it was familiar pain. After a quiet breakfast and black coffee, he picked up his old cloth tote, the one with the faded sear patch sewn onto the side, and headed to the store. Knob, milk, and bread, that's all he needed. He wore the Marine Corps jacket again. Too warm for it really, but he never left home without it. Not because it was practical, but because it grounded him, especially on days when his fingers didn't work right, or the silence in his apartment was too loud. That jacket was memory. It was his armor. The parking lot was crowded that morning. People hurried past, eyes fixed on phones, carts clattering like nothing else existed. Walter moved with care, step by step. He didn't trust sharp turns anymore. Each movement was cautious. As he passed a row of motorcycles, one caught his eye, polished, black, like it belonged in a museum. He admired it briefly, not realizing how close he was until his bag brushed the handlebar. The bike tilted slightly. A milk bottle shifted, thudding against the bread. Walter stopped right away. His heart dropped. "I'm sorry, son. Didn't mean to," he said, eyes searching. He didn't have to look far. A cluster of bikers stood nearby, sipping coffee, laughing over something Walter couldn't hear. One of them, tall, wide, inked from wrist to neck, locked eyes with him. The laughter ended. "You touched my bike," the man snarled, stepping forward. Walter squared his shoulders. "It was an accident. Nothing's broken." But it didn't matter. The biker closed in, fast, no words, just fury and a fist. The hit landed solid. Walter couldn't brace. He dropped hard. Groceries burst across the lot. Milk splashed like blood. The bottle shattered next to him. Everything went still. Then the sound of feet. People walking quicker, avoiding eye contact. A teenager glanced, then looked away. A mother pulled her child closer. The biker laughed and rejoined his friends like nothing happened. Walter didn't move at first, dizzy. His hat rolled a few feet away, the Marine emblem glinting in the sun, unnoticed. This wasn't war. It was worse, being forsaken. But someone saw it all. A quiet store clerk just out of college sent one text. The contact read, "Commander, it's your dad." Walter Morris sat slumped on the curb, blood trickling from his nose and lip. He didn't reach for his phone, didn't cry out. Decades of service had trained him to assess, endure, and wait. But this wasn't a war zone. This was home. And yet, no one stood with him. The automatic doors hissed behind passing shoppers. Some glanced. Most didn't. One store worker peeked outside, saw him, and went back in, as if ignoring it made it disappear. His groceries lay around him like shattered memories. Milk soaked into his clothes, bread crushed under his weight. His Marine cap, the one bearing the golden emblem, rested a few feet away, facing the sky, waiting for someone to acknowledge it. Walter's hands trembled as he pulled a wrinkled handkerchief from his pocket. The small cloth bore the Marine symbol in the corner, a gift from his wife before she passed. He wiped the blood from his chin, not for appearance, but for pride. He didn't want to look like someone the world had forgotten, but in that moment, he was. This wasn't Vietnam, where brothers pulled each other out of the line of fire. This wasn't Fallujah, where bonds were forged in chaos. This was a quiet town in America, and no one offered a hand. That's what hurt the most. A woman pushing a stroller slowed as she passed. Her toddler stared at the bleeding man on the pavement. She pulled the child closer, whispering, "Don't look." Walter heard her. Not the words, but the tone, the fear, the distance. He felt like a shadow, a relic, someone people didn't want to acknowledge. And yet, through a window inside the store, one person didn't turn away. Louise Thompson, a soft-spoken clerk who stocked shelves overnight to pay for school, had witnessed the whole thing. He heard the hit, saw the fall, watched the silence. He didn't know Walter personally, but he knew the jacket. His grandfather wore one just like it. Luis didn't confront the biker. He didn't sprint outside. He wasn't reckless. But he did pull out his phone. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed a short message to a contact saved under one word. "Commander." The message was brief. "Sir, it's your father. He's been attacked." Then he pressed send and looked back through the window. Outside, Walter Morris wiped the last trace of blood from his mouth and tried to stand. Not because he had the strength, but because even now he wouldn't allow the world to see him crawl. He didn't know it yet, but help was already coming. The lot had returned to its normal rhythm. Cars pulled in and out. Conversations resumed at the entrance. The biker who'd thrown the punch was back with his crew, laughing like it was just another morning. The world had moved on, or so it appeared, but underneath the surface, something was shifting. Far down the road, a deep rumble pierced the background noise. It wasn't traffic. These were engines built for something far greater, engines that followed orders, not shopping lists. The sound intensified, drawing attention. Dust began to rise from the pavement as a convoy of deep green vehicles emerged from behind the strip mall. A lead SUV trailed by 3 camo-painted Humvees moved with smooth coordination. The engines didn't roar. They didn't need to. They rolled in with certainty. The SUV at the front eased to a stop in the lot, and its door swung open slowly. Out stepped a man in digital camouflage, boots clicking against the concrete. He stood tall, his expression unreadable, jaw set. This wasn't a man here to argue. He was here to set things right. Captain Daniel Morris, Walter's son. His eyes swept the area, landing on his father slumped on the bench, bloodied, hunched, struggling to sit upright, hands curled into tight fists. Daniel didn't hesitate. He crossed the parking lot in long strides, boots echoing like a heartbeat. The soldiers stepping out of the Humvees didn't speak. They didn't have to. A dozen of them took positions quietly, near doors, corners, and exits. No weapons were visible. None were needed. Their presence shifted everything. Conversations halted mid-word. Shoppers stood still. Daniel knelt beside his father. "Dad," he said softly, emotion tightening his voice, "are you hurt?" Walter looked up through weary eyes and managed a faint grin. "Just my pride, nothing broken." Daniel gave a stiff nod and stood. His gaze shifted to Luis, the store clerk now standing just beyond the supermarket doors. Luis stepped forward, paused, then motioned toward the group of bikers along the wall. "There," he said quietly. Daniel didn't pause. He walked in their direction, his soldiers instinctively tightening their formation behind him. The biker who had struck Walter spotted them. His posture shifted, his body tensed. He puffed his chest slightly, but his eyes were darting, analyzing uniforms, reassessing odds. "Who are you?" he barked, voice unsteady beneath the front. Daniel raised his military ID calmly. "I'm the son of the man you assaulted." Silence stretched, and for the first time all day the biker understood. This wasn't being ignored. There was no chuckle this time. He looked at the ID, then at the soldiers stationed across the parking lot, each of them still, calm, but unmistakably ready. These weren't mall security. These were professionals. Their presence said everything that needed to be said. This was not going to be overlooked. Captain Morris stepped in close, voice low but deliberate. "You struck a veteran, an 85-year-old Marine, my father." The biker's facade crumbled. I didn't know." "That's the issue," Daniel replied. "You didn't care." Before tension could escalate, Daniel reached for his radio and contacted the local police. His words were precise. "Civilian assault. Location, Lincoln Plaza. Witnesses present. Victim is a decorated veteran." This time, the call wouldn't be brushed off. Minutes later, sirens broke the silence. 2 squad cars pulled into the lot, lights flashing red and blue. The officers stepping out were now greeted not by a lone elderly man, but by uniformed soldiers, a commanding officer, and a crowd that had begun to gather. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply provided reports, witness statements, store footage, and a detailed summary. There were no justifications to be made. The biker was arrested on the spot. He didn't resist. His companion said nothing. No laughter now. As he was led to the patrol car, shoppers who had previously looked away now stepped forward, not to interfere, but to witness. Luis Thompson stood among them, arms folded, eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. He hadn't said much, but right then, he stood taller than anyone else. Daniel returned to his father. Once more he knelt, this time drawing a small first aid kit from one of the Humvees. His hands were steady as he cleaned the blood from Walter's face, not like a soldier, but like a son. "I should have come sooner," he whispered. Walter shook his head gently. "You were where you had to be," he said. "So was I." As the sun began to sink behind the row of storefronts, something changed in the crowd. An elderly man wearing a Korean War veteran's cap stepped forward. He stopped in front of Walter, came to attention, and gave a crisp, formal salute. Others followed. Men, women, veterans, civilians. People who had turned their backs earlier, now standing tall with open eyes. A hush fell, not empty, but full of weight. It wrapped around Walter like a long-awaited recognition. Daniel rose beside his father as the last golden light hit the Marine emblem on his cap. He scanned the parking lot, once just pavement and passers-by, now transformed into a place where something sacred had been remembered. Justice hadn't come in vengeance. It had arrived in dignity. The story could have ended there, in that lot, but some moments demand to echo. Word of what had happened to Walter Morris, the attack, the military response, the quiet salute, spread far beyond town lines. A bystander's video, shaky and unpolished, captured more than violence. It captured a truth nearly forgotten, that honor still matters. And sometimes it has to march back into view. Within days, messages arrived, letters, emails, notes from strangers. Children sent crayon flags. Veterans from all over the nation reached out, some angry, many thankful, all moved. But one message landed deepest. From the local American Legion Post, "We'd like to honor what you stood for, Walter, not just in battle, but in peace." At first, Walter resisted. He wasn't one for applause. His service had never been for praise. It had always been for purpose. But Captain Morris, his son, his leader in a new kind of fight, gently encouraged him. "Dad, this isn't about credit. It's about legacy. It's about reminding people what matters." And so, 2 weeks after the incident, the town gathered at the Civic Center. What began as a small tribute grew into a packed event. Local officials, veterans, students, families, they filled the hall. Seats overflowed into standing crowds. On stage, a podium stood beneath a wide banner that read, "Service, Sacrifice, Sympathy." The mayor opened the ceremony, voice shaking with feeling. He spoke not just of the attack, but of the years that came before it. The years no one had seen. Mr. Morris hadn't only served in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He served without fanfare when he came home. And now we are ending that silence. The master of ceremonies stepped forward and read aloud Walter's service record. 32 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, 3 major conflicts, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and a quiet act of valor in Kandahar that saved 9 lives. As the list went on, the room grew still. Some wiped tears. Others bowed their heads. Walter sat in his wheelchair, eyes lowered, cap in hand. When his name was called, the audience stood as one. The applause didn't stop quickly. It swelled, deeper, stronger, until it became something more than noise. It became redemption. Captain Daniel Morris stepped onto the stage, turned to face his father, and knelt, not as a military officer, but as a son. He didn't speak right away. He simply placed a fresh medal in Walter's hand. Then, into the microphone, he said, "You fought for our freedom. Today, we fight for your dignity." And for the first time in years, Walter let the tears fall, not out of sadness or pain, but because he finally felt seen. No one expected what came after. 2 weeks following the ceremony, Walter received an official letter from the courthouse. But it wasn't from a judge. It came from Derek Blay Morgan, the biker who had assaulted him. Walter read it twice. The handwriting was rough, the message blunt, but beneath the ink lay something sincere. Remorse. "Sir, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'd like to talk to you face to face before I'm sentenced. No cameras, no apologies, just honesty." At first, Walter was unsure. A part of him wanted nothing to do with the man, but something in the Marine within him whispered, "We don't only confront enemies. Sometimes we help them stop being one." So he agreed. The meeting took place in a plain room at the courthouse. No press, no uniforms. Just 2 men from very different battles. Derek entered looking like a different person. No biker vest, no swagger, just denim jeans, a basic shirt, and a face burdened by guilt. He sat down across from Walter without speaking at first. Then he cleared his throat. "My dad was in Vietnam," he said. "Came home angry, drank too much, took it out on us. I blame the military for what it did to him." Walter listened quietly, giving him space. "When I saw you in that jacket," Derek said, voice breaking, "I didn't see you. I saw him. And I lost it. I was wrong." He looked up, his eyes rimmed red. "I don't expect anything, but I've started counseling. I already signed up to volunteer at the VA, whether the judge orders me to or not." Walter leaned back, weathered hands resting in his lap. "You can't change what happened," he said gently, "but you can decide what comes next." Then, to the surprise of the court staff observing through the glass, Walter reached across the table and placed a hand on Derek's arm. "Make it count. Don't let this pain go to waste." The judge, moved by both the conversation and Derek's progress, sentenced him to probation, required therapy, and 500 hours of service at the local VA hospital. Derek didn't just fulfill the sentence, he committed to it. He showed up early, stayed late, helped aging vets into their appointments, mopped floors, delivered meals. He listened. Really listened. Months later, he stood beside Walter at the town's Veterans Day parade. Not as a symbol of violence, but as living proof that people can grow. And when a young boy pointed at Derek's tattoos and asked if he was a soldier, Derek looked at Walter, then back at the child. "No, kid," he smiled, "but I'm learning what it means to serve." Walter Dean Morris never set out to become a symbol. He would have been content with quiet mornings, hot coffee, short walks, and folding his shopping list just right. But life had another role in mind. After the tribute and Derek's apology, the town saw Walter differently, not just as a soldier, but as a guide. It began with a local elementary school inviting him to speak. The principal expected a few tales from wartime and a polite round of applause. But Walter didn't talk about gunfire or tactics. He spoke about loyalty, about what it means to hold your ground when nobody's watching, about the courage and kindness. The children listened, really listened, so much so that even their teachers were caught off guard. When he finished, a small girl raised her hand and asked, "Do heroes get lonely?" Walter smiled, voice soft, "Only when they're forgotten." Word spread. More schools called. Then radio stations. A local veterans group invited him to join their advisory board. Even the police department reached out. They asked him to help educate officers on how to interact with elderly veterans, how trauma, PTSD, and the need for dignity still linger long after service. Walter didn't seek out the spotlight, but he accepted the task. He sat with young officers and gave them one message. You're not just enforcing the law. You're protecting the people who once protected you. Captain Daniel Morris, now promoted and serving in a regional command, worked with his father to launch a pilot initiative called Operation Honor. Its mission? Pair retired veterans with high school seniors, connecting wisdom with energy, stories with potential. Even Derek Blay Morgan joined. After completing his sentence, he kept showing up. Eventually, he became a volunteer coordinator at the VA, helping other veterans navigate appointments, transportation, and support. He credited Walter for giving him a second chance to become the man my father hoped I'd grow into. But Walter's greatest influence wasn't at events or in programs. It was in the little things. The way strangers greeted him at the park. How parents nudged their kids and whispered, "That man helped build this country." Respect wasn't just restored to him, but to all the gray-haired veterans seated in diners, waiting rooms, and city benches, no longer invisible. One morning, while sitting at his usual bench with a cup of coffee, a teenager approached. "Sir," he asked shyly, "were you really a hero?" Walter looked up, his gaze calm but clear. "No," he said, "but I served alongside a few, and I remember them." With that, the old Marine tipped his cap, not for himself, but for every legacy he carried. The new street sign went up quietly one morning, Veteran Walter D. Morris Way. No ceremony, no speeches, just a silent tribute from a thankful town to a man who never asked for recognition. Walter walked past it often, hands in his pockets, Marine cap resting gently on his head. He never stopped to stare. He simply kept going, the way he always had. Life had slowed, but his days had grown deeper in meaning. At the park, kids waved, teenagers paused. The man who once felt unseen now carried a presence, a quiet strength, not because of the punch, not because of the convoy, but because he chose to respond, not with bitterness, but with integrity, not with ego, but with forgiveness. Walter often said the most important lesson he ever learned in uniform wasn't how to fight. It was how to stand tall when the world turns its back. And now, others were learning to turn around and see. Across town, Derek Morgan, the man who once struck him, now spent his days helping others rise. At the VA, he wheeled veterans to appointments, asked about their pasts, and listened like their words mattered. Because now, they did. That Veterans Day, as the town gathered under golden leaves, Walter stood under the flag, saluted slowly, and whispered a promise he had carried in silence for years. "I didn't forget you. And now, neither will they." Walter Dean Morris's story reminds us, honor doesn't fade with age. It's something you live, especially when no one's watching. In a fast-moving world where the elderly often disappear into the background, his quiet strength makes us ask, have we forgotten how to truly see each other? One act of cruelty awakened an entire town, rekindling respect, forgiveness, and community. But this isn't just one man's tale. It's about every veteran, every elder, walking among us, scarred and often unseen. What if we treated each one like someone who once stood guard for our future? What if we taught our children that real strength isn't in fists, but in humility, compassion, and service? Walter didn't meet hate with anger. He met it with grace, and because of that, a town changed, a man changed, and maybe, just maybe, we can too. So now we'd like to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed someone take a stand for what's right in an unexpected way? Do you think we, as a society, still honor our veterans and elders the way we should? Share your perspective in the comments. Your voice matters, especially in conversations like this. And if this story touched your heart, please hit the like button, subscribe to Real Storyline, and help us tell stories that uplift the quiet heroes around us. Because often, the greatest change begins by simply remembering.